Balance That Matter podcast. I am your host, Laura Escamilla.
And I am your co-host, Isaac Escamilla.
So the last episode, we talked about scholarships and merit aid and how preparation and positioning can significantly reduce what families borrow. Today, we're going to talk about the costs that preparation doesn't always catch, because here's the truth. Most families go into college with a budget. They've looked at the tuition. They've looked at room and board. They've done the math. And then the first semester happens and the math changes. And we've been through this process twice. 2 kids, 2 move-in days, 2 sets of lessons learned. Our daughter is 27 now, Baylor grad. Our son is a senior at Baylor right now. And we can tell you from personal experience that it was not the tuition that surprised us. It was everything else around it. So this episode is about the financial blind spots, if you will. The costs that don't show up on the official bill, the expenses that arrive quietly, consistently, sometimes all at once. So let's talk about them. So before we get into specifics, we want to frame this. So colleges publish what's called a cost of attendance, right? We've talked about this before, the COA. It includes tuition, fees, room and board, estimate for books, transportation, and personal expenses. So that number is essentially a starting point. It's not the complete picture. The estimates built into the COA are averages. They are not your family. They're not your students' habits. They're not your travel. They're not your campus. They're not your kids' lifestyles going into college. So that gap between the estimate and reality, that's where we're talking where families get caught, where we got caught.
Yes.
Where these things happen. So let me start here, because this is a lesson that I learned the hard way, or we learned the hard way, because this is something that every parent should think about and hear. So think about your child's daily habits right now. Do they stop for coffee? Do they eat out with their friends?
Chick-fil-A.
Right. Do they go get their hair done regularly? Pedicures, fast food runs after practice, meal preps, the fork to fits and the gyms. Those habits do not stop when they leave for college. They pack those habits up right alongside their bedding and their shower caddy, and they take them off to college. Those habits often get more expensive, not less, because now they're socializing constantly. There's a coffee shop on every corner. There's delivery apps and one tap away from food, So our daughter actually did really great. She was disciplined. She stayed on budget. We were proud of how she managed everything. We even adjusted her meal plan mid-year. We went from a 7-day plan to a 5-day plan because she wasn't using it as much.
Right.
And that felt like a little win, right? We saved a little bit of money. So when our son left to Baylor, same school, we had the same conversations, right? We're the same parents, same talks. We assumed he'd follow the same patterns, and he didn't, right? The truth is, and you can go back to, I think it's episode 2 that we talked about this, and I'm not embarrassed about it because it's just reality. He maxed out his first credit card. And when we went to look at the statement, it was entirely Chick-fil-A and Chipotle and DoorDash, not big purchases, not emergencies, just food over and over again every week. So here's the thing. It wasn't irresponsibility for the sake of it. His schedule had him missing dining hall hours. The dining hall was too far from buildings. He was in between classes. It was, he was far more social than our daughter, eating with friends, grabbing food between activities. That was just part of how he moved through college life. He had to get a job over the summer to help pay for it, and he did. It was a hard lesson, and it was a lesson that we didn't see coming because we'd assume he'd be just like his sister. So that assumption is what I want families to take away from this. You can have the same conversation with 2 kids and get 2 completely different outcomes. So because they're 2 different people with 2 different schedules, social lives, relationships, and a budget for your student is actually not the same, right? So even though they're siblings, so they're not who their sibling was, they're not who you want them to be, They're who they are. The way they are now is the way they're going to be then. And I, for some reason, thought things would be different
I did too.
when he left, you know?
We did become different because we had to. We had no choice.
Right. So students typically spend $50 to $150 per month beyond their meal plan on food alone. For some students, it's more. For our son, it was more. It still is more. We're in, year 4, and it hasn't changed. We've just come to expect it now. And food is just one category. The point is not to tell your student they can't enjoy college, right? Because college is an experience. They're supposed to live it. The point is to go in with your eyes open about what living actually costs for your specific child with their specific habits. So let's just go through room and board. Let's go through the categories one by one, and we'll start with room and board. So the first surprise for many families hits before classes even start, like move-in day. You've paid tuition, you've paid room and board. You pull up to the dorm and realize this room needs everything, right? But I'm a planner, and anyone who knows me knows that I'm obsessive about planning things. So with our daughter, I didn't let that sneak up on me. I went to the orientation where we got to walk through the room, and I legit had a measuring tape in my purse to measure closets, measure beds. I planned everything. So we spent the entire summer planning and buying. I spread the purchases across paychecks, a little thing every paycheck, so that all summer long, I didn't have this massive hit at the end of the summer. And I want to be honest, it still added up more to than what I originally expected, right? I still spent more than I thought.
It always does.
Yeah. And because I planned it out, it felt more manageable rather than overwhelming. So that's what I did. Our daughter used her graduation money towards a MacBook. The smaller local scholarships she had that we talked about the last episode, these little community scholarships that went directly to her, we moved those towards her expenses to move into her supplies. That's what we used it for, her books, her first setting up of things. So that's exactly the kind of strategic use of those small awards that we talked about in the last episode. Every dollar has a job, right? It can all go towards something. So her dorm was a traditional setup. It was the room she shared with one roommate, a sink in the room, a shared community bathroom down the hall. So for this situation, we really just needed her bedding, step at a shower caddy, and the basics, manageable. Well, our son was a whole different story. Same school, but he felt he needed a private style room for his lifestyle. And that kind of setup was like an apartment, right? Where he shared a private bathroom, just one other person. The apartment was 4 people, each one with their room. But that meant that we needed bathroom supplies. You needed rugs and shower curtains, and we needed kitchen supplies, pots and pans, a pantry. We needed all kinds of things that we didn't need the first time around.
Right.
So this setup cost was different. And more significantly, the room and board cost itself was higher than it was when we paid for his sister. The same school, but a different price tag, because depending on the type of housing your student chooses, that determines how much room and board is.
Right.
It's not the same across every single selection. So you have to be aware of that. And I had to go and advocate and increase his cost of attendance because of that change, because it was their room, their fees, and it was way less. Their cost of attendance fee was what they had noted was way less than what it was actually costing. And they did change that, but I had to go advocate for that myself. So that's a decision that families often make without fully understanding the cost difference, right? When your student is picking their housing and they're making that decision, it's a financial decision.
It is.
So it's not just a lifestyle one. So talk about it before they start submitting those housing applications. So my advice is to start early, spread the purchases out if you can, and be intentional how you apply money that you get. Small scholarship funds, graduation money that come directly to your student. Those dollars can really work for you before class starts to kind of help with these expenses. So here is one that lives in the cost of attendance and still catches families off guard. So the cost of attendance includes estimates for books and course materials. So what it doesn't tell you is how wildly that number varies by major, by course, by semester. And I mean, wildly. Like, it is so different for every student. So our daughter was a science major. Before her first semester even started, her course list came in and we weren't expecting all the little things, right? She needed a lab coat, safety glasses. And I want you to hear this because no one told us that this was coming. We had to buy a miniature human skeleton model. We even had to get a dead rat that she needed to dissect that she kept in her freezer in her dorm. So these are things that I'm not making up. These are actual things that happened. And the little skeleton thing we kept, and I use it for Halloween decorations now. But she needed it,
it's very nice.
We had to buy it. And that's just how it went. So thinking about the fact that there was a little rat in her freezer, you know, her freshman year of college is kind of funny now that we think about it. But at the time, it was crazy. And, you know, it changes for everybody, for every major. Our son is a business major, and that felt a little more straightforward. Isaac and I are business majors. We kind of seemed like we were on it. We sent him to Baylor with a MacBook thinking we were set. And I know we've mentioned this before, but it really put us off that we found out after he arrived and got into his business courses that he needed a PC because one course he was taking needed specific software that didn't run on a Mac. So we had to order a PC laptop through Best Buy there in Waco where he could go pick it up. And it was an immediate, like, we need this now. We have to do this now, figure it out. And we weren't planning for that. It was a totally unplanned purchase that we made after move-in day, after he started classes. It just kind of came up, you know, and both our kids in their situations eventually asked for iPads because digital textbooks are increasingly the norm, and reading them on a laptop is hard while you're trying to do work. So an extra iPad became something that they both eventually needed.
And an iPad that supports a pencil so they could annotate on
so they could take
those
notes.
Textbooks.
Right.
Yes.
So everything gets complicated really fast. So the point is not that your student will need a rat or a second laptop. The point is that you don't know what your student will need until you see the syllabus, when sometimes the syllabus doesn't come in until they're starting class the first day.
That's right.
So, you know, you don't want to buy too much ahead of time, but also expect to buy things after classes start. So check course requirements as early as possible. Look up what your student's major typically demands in terms of materials and equipment. And if we had looked, we didn't think of looking, but if we had gone to the business website and looked, it tells you that they expect you to have a PC. We just didn't look. We assumed that a MacBook would be fine for everything.
Right.
So go look and pay attention. Build a buffer into your textbook and supplies budget because that COA estimate is not going to cover everything. It never does. The next thing that varies enormously depending on the campus, depending on the housing situation, and decisions families don't always know they'll have to make until they're already there, is parking permits at colleges and universities can run anywhere from $200 to $800 per year. But that range gets more complicated quickly. So at Baylor, the cost of the permit wasn't just about having a spot. It was about where that spot was, right? A covered garage close to the dorm costs more than a general surface parking permit. And that difference mattered to us, especially with our daughter living on campus, because we wanted her to feel safe walking to her car at night.
Yes.
And not anxious about where it was parked and how far she had to walk alone in the dark. And that peace of mind had a price. I mean, we had to choose to pay that for that parking garage. Also, in Waco, it rains a lot. And we wanted to make sure that it was covered, that she could get to it safely. So then when she moved off campus, there's a new layer of cost that appeared because in our case, fortunately, both our kids lived near campus, walking distance when they moved off campus. But if they hadn't, we would have had to buy another parking pass at campus for them to drive to school and park there for classes. And then we were also paying for parking at their apartment.
That's right.
At her apartment. We did the same thing. We had to park for a spot. So we knew she had a guaranteed spot and she wasn't parking outside or anything random. We paid for a parking spot in a garage. So we would have needed to pay at the apartment complex and at the school.
Right.
And I think her first year, if I'm not mistaken, she lived a little further away, and we did have to pay separate things, but then she moved to a closer one. All of these things are complex: apartments, campuses, extra charges, where it is, how close it is. All of these things cost something different. So just keep it in mind when you're going through it. So for our daughter living alone in her apartment, that covered parking wasn't a luxury. It was a safety decision. So again, we didn't want her coming home late at night, worrying about where her car was, walking through an unlit parking lot by herself. That's a conversation worth having with your student before they sign a lease, not after. Ask about parking cost at every stage, on campus, off campus. Options exist for safety, convenience, matter, all those things that matter to your family, because they often do come with a price tag. So the other thing that really affected us, I think, and this one I feel personally relates to lots of families in South Texas. Baylor is 7 hours away from home. And, in Texas, we measure distance in hours and time.
Everything.
So Baylor is 7 hours away from home. So when our daughter was there, and now with our son, getting them back and forth for breaks, it's not a quick thing. That's like a day to drive home, a day to go. So that's gas, and that's, in some cases, airfare. If we're trying to get them home quickly for something in particular, it's a flight, drive to Austin, get a flight, get home, and go back and forth. So Thanksgiving breaks, winter breaks, spring break, summer. If they're driving, that's gas, but sometimes multiple tanks of gas, depending on the distance. If they're flying, that's airfare. If you're booking last minute, holidays, airfare is not cheap. So budget several $100s per semester for travel home if your college is more than a few hours away. And if you can book early, book early. The cost difference between booking Thanksgiving flights in September versus the week of is significant. So with our daughter and our son, both at Baylor, traveling home was consistent for both of them. They both had vehicles, but it was a real line that we had to put in our budget of cost of gas each way. So it needs to be built into your plan before the semester starts, how that's going to work for your family. And that's, not even counting us traveling to see them and hotels and those things. That's just them coming home and managing their time. There's football games that we went to, special family weekends, and all of those things that added up for us too,
Parents
going
weekend.
to see them and visiting and staying in hotels and that kind of stuff. So that's a whole other thing. So just travel in general, figure out how you're going to do that. So here's another one that surprises families because it feels like it shouldn't be in your budget, but it is. So college is an experience, and there's no way around that. And honestly, there shouldn't be, because if your student is leaving, you're going to want them to participate in campus traditions, join organizations, go to games, and build a life there. So these moments are the moments that cost money. So let me give you a specific example. At Baylor, there is a beloved tradition for freshmen called the Baylor Line. So students run onto the field before games and the sea of gold jerseys. It's one of those experiences that becomes like a core college memory. It's a memory for us as parents too. But to participate, students attend a line camp before freshman year even starts, right, and they need a specific jersey. That jersey runs around $160. The camp costs money, and it's a one-time cost. It's a wonderful tradition, but it's not in the COA. It's not in your bill. You're paying that out of pocket. And both our kids did the Baylor Line, and we knew about it, but I want families to understand that every campus has versions of this, right?
But they've got their own traditions,
their own events, experiences that are essentially expected as part of the culture. And that does carry a price tag for families that we're not told about in admissions packets.
Right. And consider that these are once in a lifetime opportunities and experiences that you can only experience one time.
Yeah, if they're going off, you want them.
Right. You absolutely want them to be a part of that group and part of that collective and then those long-standing traditions. That's a very important part of the entire college experience.
Right. And their memories of being there with their peers, you know.
Right.
So Then there's Greek life. Our daughter went to college, insisted that she would never, ever, ever join a sorority. And the first thing she did was join a sorority.
Maybe the second.
But she did. Her organization, to her credit, was a small organization. The fee was $500 per term, plus contributions towards socials and events throughout the year. That's on the more affordable side of the spectrum. Some of the large sororities can run about $3,000 a term. And this is not a typo. $3,000, right? So this is for fraternities. This is for sororities. That price tag is there. And Greek life is a very important part of going to college. And if your student wants to get into a sorority or fraternity, you need to discuss what that costs.
Indeed.
And of course, it can be less than that, but have that plan. So if your student is interested in Greek life, find out the actual cost of the specific organization before they fall in love with it. Just like college, you want to make sure you know going in, because Greek life is not only an activity with fees attached. Students participating in these things, it's time too. And then you have students participating in other types of activities at school, like club sports, recreational leagues, often pay membership fees, equipment costs, traveling expenses when they compete with teams away from campus. So these are things that are easily overlooked because they feel informal, right? But the costs are real. So the bottom line is the same with food. College is supposed to be lived. Budget for the living. Set up a realistic number for social and activity spending before your student leaves. And have an honest conversation about what that covers. And revisit it if it involves charges, because it will add up for you. And if your student's going to get a job while they're in school and you expect them to pay these things out of pocket with their own money that they earn, then have that plan, have that discussion, have that expectation for them. So how do families actually prepare for costs like these? So first, we need to have a real conversation before move-in day, not a general be careful with money conversation, a specific one. Go through each category. Estimate real numbers based on your student and your campus. Write it down. Second, build a monthly spending plan with your student. Not a restriction, a reality check, right? Like, don't ever eat out because that's not going to work. Like, realistically, this is what we're going to budget for. Here's what we have. Here's what it can cover. Here's what's going to happen if it runs out or not going to happen. Third, don't treat these costs as surprises when they happen. Treat them as unknown variables that you didn't plan for, right? Because you don't want to chastise your kids because these things come up. You want them to have these experiences. So if you can, go with the flow, and hopefully you've had this conversation and they know what to expect, right? Fourth, remember that these costs are ongoing. They show up early in the semester, not just the first semester, not just year one. These things keep going every year.
They do. So, all the way till the end.
Till the end. The habits, the travel, the social life, the books, the last minute needs, those are every year. So what I've learned, I don't know if Isaac's learned the same thing from sending our kids to college and from the families that we talk to, is that the financial stress doesn't usually come from the big number of tuition and bill on the bill, because we are expecting that. We planned for that. It comes from the accumulation of the smaller things that nobody warned us about. A little bit here, a little bit there, a phone call home that starts with, I just need a little bit more. I wanted to do this one thing. I dread those calls, and I begin to think back to the calls where I called my parents and they're like, oh gosh, she's calling again, right? I remember it and I feel it in my core, like it's coming around. So this episode is not about fear. It's about preparation. Families who name these costs in advance, who talk about them honestly, who build them into the plan, those families don't get blindsided. So they get to focus on experience instead of stress. And that's what financial awareness makes possible. So in the next episode, which will be our final episode for this season and this workshop experience that we've been having, we've talked about all the financial aid and the loans, scholarship, unexpected costs, and each piece of the puzzle on its own, right? So In the next episode, we're going to have a complete picture and we're going to talk about advocating for your students. We've talked about a couple of situations throughout every episode where you may need to call the school and advocate. And we're going to go into what you can and can't do or should and shouldn't do and finalize everything with that, with what we can do ourselves when we come across challenging situations. And again, because these situations aren't just first time, it's not just that initial freshman year. These are things that every single year we have to keep dealing with. So as we move forward, we're going to be proactive. We're going to advocate for our students. We're going to plan, and we're going to navigate this process. So we will talk to you next week, and we are going to get a final closure and picture of everything. We'll talk soon.
All right. And don't forget to follow us on Spotify and like and subscribe if you're listening on YouTube. And have a great one. Bye.
Bye.